Hangar was a cathedral of iron and silence. Its walls stretched high into the shadows, streaked with oil stains and burn marks from years of use. Dim lights flickered overhead, bathing rows of war machines in a pale glow. Engines hummed softly, like great beasts breathing in their sleep. For a moment it felt almost peaceful, as if the universe outside had forgotten the war. But everyone inside knew better. The silence was not peace. It was the heavy pause before the storm. Beyond those hangar doors, the galaxy was burning. Whole empires that once ruled with pride and cruelty were now fighting for survival. Fleets clashed like gods, hurling fire at each other. Planets were turned into glowing scars, and countless voices were silenced under the weight of ambition. Yet here, on this forgotten edge of space, humanity prepared to step forward. A species once mocked as weak, fragile, and unworthy of the stars, now stood on the razor's edge of destiny. The doors began to rumble. Metal shivered and dust fell from the ceiling as the massive locks disengaged. Slowly, light seeped in from the other side. First a thin line of brilliance, then widening into a flood that illuminated the faces of those waiting inside. The pilots stood by their fighters, helmets under their arms, uniforms scorched and patched from old battles. These were not soldiers born of privilege or raised in academies with gilded halls. They were survivors, farmers who had learned to fly, miners who had turned their hands from stone to steel, children of ruined cities who had grown into warriors with eyes of fire. Each face carried a story. A man with scars across his jaw remembered the day his village was turned to ash by an empire's patrol. A woman with sharp eyes carried a small pendant inside her pocket, the last gift from her brother, who had never made it back from the First War. Another pilot, barely 20, still trembled when he thought of the home he left behind. But when he stepped toward his ship, the fear in his chest hardened into steel. These were not perfect soldiers. They were human, and that was what made them dangerous. The hangar echoed with footsteps as the commander walked down the line. His name was spoken in whispers, both in fear and in respect. He was not a man of inspiring speeches, but when he looked at his pilots, his eyes carried a weight that words could not match. He stopped before the first fighter, a machine patched together from salvaged metal, its surface dented and scarred. He placed a hand on the nose of the ship, as if feeling the heartbeat within. Then, in a low voice that carried through the silence, he said only one thing: "Today they will see what it means to face us." The pilots did not cheer. They did not clap or raise their fists. They simply nodded, as if the words were already written into their bones. The commander stepped back, and the sound of engines roaring to life filled the air. The hangar vibrated under the power of machines built not for beauty but for survival. Flames licked the floor as thrusters awakened. The silence was gone now. It had been replaced by the pulse of defiance. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly, a canvas painted with fire and wreckage. Alien fleets waited like predators circling prey, their ships vast and bristling with weapons that had humbled worlds. They expected fear. They expected surrender. But inside those cockpits, as human pilots strapped themselves in, something burned brighter than fear. It was not arrogance, not blind courage. It was the simple, unshakable refusal to kneel. For centuries, humanity had been told they were too young, too weak, too reckless to survive among the stars. They were called dustlings, primitives, children playing with fire they could not control. Empires had looked at Earth as a curiosity, a planet that might produce laborers, maybe soldiers, to throw at the fringes of wars. No one had believed this small blue world could ever matter, but tonight that belief would be shattered. The hangar doors groaned as they reached their full height. Beyond them lay the battlefield, filled with shadows of warships waiting to devour them. The light of distant suns reflected off the steel bodies of human fighters, turning them into spears of silver ready to fly. One by one, the aces climbed into their ships. Cockpits sealed shut with final clicks, engines screamed, and comms lit up with quiet voices steady as stone. Ready, locked, for Earth. The commander stood at the edge of the hangar, watching as the first ships hovered, then tilted forward, engines glowing like the hearts of dragons. His chest felt heavy, but not with fear. It was pride, a pride born not of victories, but of struggle. These men and women were more than pilots. They were the answer to centuries of mockery, the living proof that humanity did not break. The first fighter shot forward, cutting through the veil of light like an arrow loosed into destiny, then another and another, until the hangar thundered with the storm of wings. The silence was gone. The waiting was over. The hangar doors had opened. and humanity was rising. The fleet moved into the dark sea of stars, their ships no more than sparks against the vastness of space. Inside the cockpits, the hum of systems and the steady rhythm of heartbeats filled the silence. Each pilot sat alone, surrounded by controls and glass, staring into infinity. Yet though the galaxy stretched endless before them, the weight pressing on their shoulders was heavier than anything gravity could create. They carried not only their lives but the hope of their entire species. For centuries, humanity had lived under the shadow of others. They had entered the stars late, stumbling with engines that barely worked, ships that seemed like fragile toys beside alien cruisers. At first, they begged for a seat at the Galactic Council. They traded resources, they offered service, they tried to prove their worth. But the older empires only laughed. They called Earth a nursery, its people nothing but children who had wandered too far from home. Every negotiation was twisted against them. Every promise was broken. And then came the wars. The empires turned on one another, fighting for territory, for pride, for the greed that had consumed them for centuries. Their fleets darkened the skies of 1,000 worlds, and their arrogance blinded them to the fire kindling on Earth. Humanity watched. Humanity learned, and when the flames of alien pride grew too hot, humanity did what they always had. They adapted. In the cockpits now, those lessons were alive. A man remembered the long nights in the shipyard welding panels from scrap, knowing one mistake meant death in battle. A woman thought of her childhood in the refugee camps, the smell of smoke clinging to her clothes as she watched the sky for ships that never brought mercy. Another pilot, barely grown into adulthood, gripped the stick of his fighter and thought of his little sister waiting back home, asking when he would return. Their ships were not beautiful. They were patched, dented, painted with the colors of desperation. But each one carried something no empire had ever understood, a human heart that refused to give up. Ahead, the alien fleets formed like walls of steel and fire. Great flagships stretched miles long, their hulls glowing with power. Weapons lined their sides enough to reduce continents to ash. The admirals of these fleets sat in chambers carved from crystal and iron, their eyes filled with the arrogance of gods. To them, humanity was an insect swarm, daring to rise against titans. But arrogance was a poison, and it had already begun to eat them from within. The humans knew they could not match power for power. They could not outnumber, they could not outgun. But they did not need to. They had something the empires had forgotten long ago, desperation sharpened into brilliance, courage born from endless struggle. Where alien admirals saw pawns, humans saw possibilities. Every weakness in the enemy's wall was a door waiting to be opened. Every mistake, no matter how small, was a chance to strike. The commander's voice came through the comms, steady, strong. Remember who you are. Remember who we fight for. They call us dustlings. Let them choke on that dust. The words settled in their bones. They did not roar, they did not laugh. They simply adjusted their grips, tightened their belts, and let the silence answer for them. The first shots were fired, brilliant beams cutting across the void. Explosions bloomed like terrible suns. The humans moved like shadows, weaving between the blasts, their ships dancing with impossible grace. To the alien admirals, it was madness. No one should fly into fire like that. To the humans, it was survival. And survival had been their teacher since the day they were born. The galaxy watched as the fragile race from the blue planet defied death itself. For every fighter lost, 10 more pushed forward. For every ace struck down, another rose, teeth clenched, eyes burning. And in the darkness of space, among shattered wrecks and burning worlds, a truth began to echo. The weight of the galaxy no longer belonged to the old empires. It rested now in the hands of those iron-willed aces, rising from a world no one had believed in. And they carried it with fire in their hearts. The battlefield lit up like a second sunrise. Alien weapons fired first, beams of energy stretching across the void, cutting through the blackness of space. To the admirals watching from their towering bridges, the battle already looked won. Their warships were massive, armored with layers of crystal and steel. Their weapons had cracked moons and silenced rebellions before. Against them, the human fighters looked like sparks flickering in a storm. Fragile things meant to be crushed. But then the sparks began to move. The human ships darted forward with impossible speed, weaving between the alien volleys. They moved like hunters, not prey. One dove under a plasma beam so close that its hull glowed from the heat, then rolled upward and fired a burst of missiles straight into the belly of a cruiser. The explosion ripped open the enemy's armor, scattering debris like dying stars. Another fighter streaked low along the flank of a battleship, dropping mines that clamped onto its surface and tore it apart from within. Inside the cockpits, the aces gritted their teeth and flew with every ounce of strength they had. Their eyes burned from lack of sleep. Their hands ached from gripping controls too tightly, but they did not falter. They thought of their homes, of faces waiting on Earth, of the long history of mockery and chains. Each maneuver was a message. We will not bow. The alien admirals watched in disbelief. Their fleets were disciplined, their strategies rehearsed over centuries. But this chaos, this madness, it should not have worked. Human fighters moved too unpredictably, too recklessly. They broke every pattern, ignored every rule of war, yet somehow their recklessness cut through precision. One admiral slammed his fist on the command table. They are insects. Crush them! But already the insects had sunk their teeth in deep. In the heart of the battle, the human commander's voice rang steady over comms. Strike where it hurts. Not their armor, their heart. And the aces listened. They ignored the giant ships bristling with guns and instead cut through the tendrils that fed them. Fuel lines, communication relays, supply barges drifting behind the fleet. The empires had grown fat and comfortable, blind to the little things that kept their war machines alive. The humans were not blind. They had lived their lives surviving on scraps, and now those scraps became blades. An alien carrier erupted in flame, its decks filled with fire as its ammunition stores detonated. The shockwave rippled outward, shoving human fighters into wild spins, but they recovered, wings steady, eyes forward. Another cruiser tried to retreat, engines roaring, but a pair of human ships swooped in and shredded its thrusters until the vessel drifted helplessly, caught in its own smoke. For every human ship that was torn apart, 10 alien vessels followed it into darkness, and with each death the humans whispered silent promises to the fallen. We will carry this to the end. We will not let your sacrifice fade. Yet victory was not free. Human voices vanished one by one from the comms. A pilot screamed as his ship was caught in a beam of energy, the sound cutting off as quickly as it began. Another whispered a goodbye before diving his crippled fighter into the bridge of an enemy destroyer, taking it with him in a blaze of fire. The battlefield became a graveyard of courage, both terrifying and beautiful. Still, the humans pressed on. Their small fleet cut deeper into the alien armada, leaving trails of smoke and fire. They moved like knives through flesh, refusing to stop, refusing to give in. The admirals who had mocked them now leaned forward in fear. Their arrogance cracked, and in its place grew something they had never felt toward humanity: respect and dread. At last, the commander's voice rose again. We bleed, but we are not broken. Push forward! The surviving fighters roared as one. Engines flared, wings tilted, and they dove into the heart of the enemy. The galaxy had witnessed the first clash, and it was not the empires who stood tall in its wake. It was the humans, the iron-willed aces, and with every burning wreck left behind, the galaxy's balance shifted, one heartbeat at a time. The flames of battle spread far beyond the first clash. What began as a single desperate strike by human fighters grew into a wildfire that swept across the stars. Alien fleets once thought invincible staggered back in confusion. Their admirals had never faced enemies who fought this way. Reckless, unyielding, striking at the fragile arteries that fed their massive machines of war. What had once been monuments of dominance now cracked and fell like brittle towers. Word traveled quickly across the galaxy. The mighty empires whose banners had flown over countless worlds were losing ground. Their supply chains lay in ruins, their colonies cut off, their fleets crumbling piece by piece. The humans, dismissed as nothing more than dustlings, had become a storm that no wall could withstand. In the dark corridors of imperial palaces, rulers trembled. Marble floors that once echoed with the sound of prideful steps now carried the whispers of fear. Courtiers and generals lowered their voices when they spoke of Earth. Fear clung to them, not only because of the battles being lost, but because of how they were lost. The humans did not conquer with overwhelming numbers. They won with will, with persistence, with the fire of people who had been mocked too long and had decided once and for all to rise. In the skies above burning planets, the difference was clear. Alien warships moved like rigid machines, bound to ancient codes and precise orders. Human fighters, though smaller, moved with creativity, weaving unexpected paths, turning hopeless moments into victories. For every human who fell, another rose to carry the torch. And in this endless cycle, empires found themselves breaking apart. On one distant world, an alien governor looked out from the safety of his tower and saw his fleet consumed in fire. His hands shook as he realized no reinforcements would come. Human aces had cut the supply lines weeks before. On another world, slaves long held under imperial chains rose in rebellion, inspired by the sight of fragile human ships defying gods. Across star systems, the same story repeated. The fire spread faster than it could be contained. But in the cockpits, the humans did not see themselves as heroes. They saw the cost. Every battle carved deeper wounds into their hearts. Comms filled with static and silence where once there had been laughter. Photos taped to dashboards were all that remained of friends who never returned. Still they fought. They carried not only their own weight, but the weight of the fallen. The commander knew it well. Sitting in his battered carrier, he watched the battle maps fill with red markers for ships destroyed. Names flashing and then vanishing from the screen. His chest ached with every loss, yet he never allowed his voice to waver when he spoke to his pilots. We cannot stop. If we stop, everything we've lost is wasted. Keep moving, keep striking. And so they did. An alien battleship older than Earth's history fell to pieces under a swarm of human fighters. Another carrier exploded, lighting the void with flames brighter than any star. Empire after empire, once united by pride, began to fracture. Some sought peace. Some turned on one another. And some, desperate to survive, whispered the unthinkable, that perhaps humanity was not weak, not foolish, not unworthy. Perhaps they were something else entirely. On Earth, news traveled slower, but when it came, it was met with tears and cheers. Families wept for the sons and daughters who would never return. But they also whispered with pride. In ruined streets rebuilt with trembling hands, children spoke the names of the aces as if they were legends. Humanity, long ignored and mocked, was no longer invisible. They were rising and the galaxy was watching. Still, the humans knew the war was far from over. The empires would not surrender easily. More fleets would come, more battles would scar the stars. But already something irreversible had happened. The old world of balance and arrogance was gone. The galaxy was changing, and at the heart of it all were the aces, iron-willed, scarred, unbroken. The galaxy had laughed at them once. Now it burned before their fire. The great halls of the alien war councils were no longer filled with laughter or arrogance. Where once admirals stood tall in robes of power, now they gathered in silence, their heads lowered, their hands trembling. These were beings who had commanded fleets larger than continents, who had watched civilizations bend to their will, yet now they felt the weight of defeat pressing down like a mountain. The name on every tongue was the same: humans. No one had expected this. The empires had ruled for centuries, their fleets unmatched, their knowledge of war passed down through countless generations. They had fought each other, crushed rebellions, and enslaved entire species. To them, humanity had been nothing more than a latecomer to the stars, a fragile race with fragile bones, too reckless and too naive. But now, in the ashes of battlefields, the truth burned bright. The so-called dustlings had become giants. In one chamber, a massive table stretched across a room carved from stone and crystal. Around it, alien admirals sat in silence, their faces lined with fear. Holographic images of wrecked fleets flickered above the table. Carriers split apart, dreadnoughts drifting powerless, colonies ablaze. Each mark was another reminder that humanity's fire could not be contained. An admiral with silver scales broke the silence. His voice, once sharp with command, cracked with exhaustion. We underestimated them. We mocked them. And now our fleets lie in ruins. Another slammed his clawed hand onto the table. They are savages. They throw their lives away like water. No discipline, no honor, only madness. But across from him, an older admiral shook his head slowly. His eyes were dim, his voice soft. Not madness, Will, the kind we forgot long ago. The words cut through the room. For a moment no one spoke. They all knew it was true. Their empires had grown lazy with power, relying on fleets of steel and weapons of unimaginable strength. They had forgotten what it meant to fight with nothing but survival in their hearts. The humans had not forgotten. They had never been allowed to. Reports came in from across the galaxy. Colonies lost. Rebellion spreading. Supply lines gone. Everywhere the same image repeated. Small human fighters darting between massive ships, tearing them apart piece by piece. The admirals felt something they had not felt in centuries. Fear. Then came the summons. In a vast chamber of surrender, alien leaders and admirals gathered before human commanders. The air was thick with shame. Some admirals lowered themselves to one knee. Others bowed their heads so low their foreheads touched the cold floor. Their robes of power dragged in the dust. These were the same beings who once demanded entire planets kneel before them. Now they knelt before the children of Earth. The human commanders stood silent. Their uniforms were scorched, their eyes heavy with loss. They did not smile, did not boast. They carried the weight of the dead too heavily to celebrate. The silence that filled the chamber was louder than any cheer. One alien admiral, his pride broken, dared to raise his eyes. "Why do you not rejoice?" he asked bitterly. "You have defeated us. You have burned our fleets. You have forced us to our knees. Why do you not gloat as we once did?" The human commander looked at him for a long moment. His face was lined with grief, his eyes shadowed by the names of the fallen. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried through the hall like thunder. Because victory is not glory. Victory is cost. The words silenced the chamber. The alien admirals, who had once measured victory in treasure and power, could not understand the weight behind them. But in that silence they saw it, the difference between their arrogance and humanity's resolve. The humans had not fought for conquest. They had fought because they refused to vanish. They had fought because every name lost was a promise to fight harder, and that truth made the aliens bow lower, their pride shattered. The war was not yet over, but in that chamber the galaxy shifted. The admirals who once mocked humanity now trembled before them. They had thought humans were dust. But dust under fire and pressure becomes iron, and iron does not kneel. The war had become a storm, and in the heart of it stood humanity, battered, scarred, but unbroken. Across the galaxies, battles raged like wildfires, leaving trails of smoke, shattered fleets, and broken worlds. Yet behind the destruction there was something stronger rising, something no empire could extinguish: hope. For the first time in countless ages, oppressed races looked to the skies and saw not the banners of their conquerors, but the fragile ships of humans carving paths through impossible odds. Those ships were not grand, not invincible. They were small, dented, and often falling apart. But they moved with courage. They fought with desperation. And in that desperation others found strength. On a mining world long enslaved, the workers paused when the sound of battle thundered above them. They saw alien dreadnoughts falling like burning meteors, chased by human fighters that looked no bigger than sparks. For the first time, whispers of rebellion stirred in the dark tunnels. Chains felt weaker. Masters felt vulnerable. The storm above gave courage below. But for the humans inside those fragile machines, the cost was unbearable. Every victory left empty seats in their carriers. Every battle ended with silence where voices once sang songs of home. In the command decks, officers pinned names to the walls, names of the fallen written in shaky hands so they would never be forgotten. The war was painting its victories with tears. The commander bore that weight more than anyone. He stood on the bridge of his carrier, staring out into the endless void, where wrecks of both enemy and ally drifted like tombs. His heart carried every pilot lost, every sacrifice made, and yet he also carried the fire that drove them forward, the fire of Earth, the fire of freedom. His voice, though weary, carried strength as he whispered to himself, "We fight not because we are strong, but because we refuse to bow." Across the stars, alien rulers watched in disbelief. Empires that once stood like mountains were beginning to crumble into sand. Every broken fleet was another crack in their walls of arrogance. They realized too late that their true enemy was not human ships or human weapons. It was human spirit. And that spirit was spreading. Planets once silent now roared with rebellion. Species once broken now stood tall. What began as Earth's fight was becoming a galaxy's war for freedom. Humanity had become the storm, and the storm was only growing stronger. The war was no longer just battles in the stars, it was battles inside every heart. Entire worlds had begun to shake off their chains, but freedom was never born without pain. Where the humans marched, hope rose, but so did grief. The ashes of the fallen mixed with the fire of rebellion, creating a storm that touched every corner of the galaxy. In the ruins of a once great city, a young child watched human soldiers arrive. They did not look like saviors. Tired eyes, broken armor, blood on their hands. Yet when they lifted the child and whispered, "You are free now," it was as if the universe itself had spoken. For the first time, the people believed that the oppressors were not gods. They were just rulers of stone, and stone could crumble. Still, freedom carried a price. For every planet liberated, another was scarred by fire. For every victory sung, there was a silence left by those who would never return. In the human fleets, laughter was rare and smiles were heavy. Soldiers leaned on one another not just for strength, but for the memory of home. Songs of Earth were sung softly in dark halls like prayers to a place many feared they would never see again. Yet it was this sorrow that made their courage burn brighter. Humanity did not fight because they loved war. They fought because they loved peace so fiercely that they were willing to sacrifice everything for it. The galaxy had never seen such a paradox. Warriors who longed for silence, destroyers who dreamed of creation. In the alien councils, despair deepened. They had thought fear would crush humanity. Instead, it made them unbreakable. They had thought loss would scatter them. Instead, it bound them together tighter than steel. Each scar only carved their spirit deeper, until it shone like fire in the night. On one liberated world, as flags of rebellion were raised, an old alien turned to his people and whispered with trembling lips, "The humans have brought us more than freedom. They have reminded us of our own hearts." And so the storm spread, not only through fleets and fire, but through souls. The galaxy was changing, and at the center of that change stood humanity, small and fragile, yet holding a flame too fierce to ever die.